Hello, this is Angela with Progress Permaculture. It is a beautiful but very warm evening here in Portland, Oregon in Zone 8B. I'm hanging out in the backyard. I have every intention of doing some bunting back here. I had like a banner that was hanging back here, but the wind blew it down because we get these very strong winds coming in from the east, and they kind of wreak havoc with everything in the garden. But I want to do a bunting out here. Since I spend a lot of time sitting here, my view is right out into the rain garden and the annual veggie garden and then the orchard beyond. And it's probably my favorite place to be right now. I spend a lot of time out here weaving and using the spinning wheel and knitting, and either sitting quietly or hanging out with my kids or listening to podcasts. Beautiful, beautiful space. Really, really grateful for the opportunity to have a gorgeous garden, however small it may be, and to have this pergola area here that's kind of sheltered from the heat in summer, sheltered from the rain, and allows me a chance to have this kind of transitional space between the house and the garden. So like I said, I spend a lot of time out here. Actually, I'm out here spinning right now. You can see my spinning wheel. But I wanted to take a few minutes and share with you all a little bit of like experimental, not necessarily archaeology, although perhaps that's what it is. I've been doing quite a bit of tablet weaving on Ruth's Inkle loom the last couple of weeks because I've had kind of a fair amount of time in phone calls and appointments and Zoom meetings out here. It's something I can work on that's really mindless. So I thought, what a great opportunity to do a little experiment and a little comparison between different kinds of tablets for tablet weaving. Now, tablet weaving is a really ancient craft. It is more than 1,000 years old. It's a craft where folks made narrow bands of all different kinds of weaving. I have several tablet weaving videos on my channel. It's something that I only got into in the new year because my daughter is getting into it. So I thought, as someone who likes to design better and is constantly looking and testing the ways that we are doing things and asking, like, is there a better way? That kind of permaculture thinking of the more we focus on improving our design, the more enjoyable and efficient our lives will be. So that's no different than how I approach my hobbies. So I thought, let's do a little experiment here. In tablet weaving, you use cards to rotate the warp of the loom. And the ones I've been using since the beginning are these. They're 3-inch. And I got them really cheap online. You can see they're labeled. And they're just a piece of cardboard with holes punched in it. And I've been using these, and I found they're really hard on my hands. You have to grab the tablet and twist it, the whole deck of tablets, basically, and twist them. And so I thought, you know what? What if I got some tablets that were a little bit smaller and didn't require such a large hand span? Would those bother my hands less? So I decided to do a little experiment. I found that weaving with these large cards, not only did my hands hurt, but also over time the cards get bent, right? It's just paper. And the more you weave and that torque and twist and motion, the cards get bent and they wear out. The paper gets really pliable over time. It no longer has that rigidity that it needs to be effective. And I thought, well, what about some other materials? What traditionally was used, like Vikings did tablet weaving to decorate the collars of their dresses, the hems on their dresses, the straps on their bags and satchels. It was a really important decorative element. And those were woven out of primarily wool. I primarily weave out of cotton. And that's because I was gifted a whole bunch of cotton warp yarn when we were given a loom several years ago. And so I'm just using this up. It's very easy and very beginner friendly. But I thought, like, what did the Vikings use? What would be a more sustainable and lasting, durable way to do tablet weaving, also called card weaving? So I found that traditionally Vikings used a couple of different materials. They used bone, horn, or wood. And at least those are the things that have survived. So I went online, and there is someone on Etsy, and I will link to their store, that has these made out of horn. And they were pretty darn spendy, so I only bought 8, which is ideal because that is the width of a lot of very narrow traditional tablet weavings. 8 cards will get you a width about like this. And so I purchased some of those horn cards, and then I purchased some wooden cards from here in the US. You'll notice these are 2-inch compared to the 3-inch, and I thought that would be easier on my hands, right? Look how much smaller those are. Less to grip and easier to use, less hard on my hands. The downside of using a smaller card is that the shed that you produce is smaller as well. So the warp yarn coming off of it through which you have to throw your shuttle is smaller, right? Look at this, right? This shed versus this shed, smaller. My neighbor's dog's barking a little bit, it's okay. Turned out to not be a big issue for me, not an issue at all. And I found that using smaller cards, my hands hurt much less. So the horn cards are quite a bit wider. It's probably difficult to see here than paper cards. And I wondered, like, would that have more wear and tear on the warp yarn? I also wondered if the wooden ones would have more wear and tear on the warp yarn. They're a little bit sharper edges, right? Would there be increased friction? What works best in terms of friction on the warp? What spins most easily?
Here you can see what I mean by spins most easily. I'm demonstrating with the wooden cards first. You can see that I'm rotating them forward. I'm doing a very simple pattern here, and I'm looking at what is the friction that is occurring every time I turn those cards. How much wear and tear is it putting on the threads? Also, please note the small size of the shed through which I pass the shuttle. As I mentioned earlier, a larger size of card produces a larger triangle, aka shed, that gives you more room to move your shuttle through. I did not have any trouble with the smaller shed. I'll talk about the results here in a moment, but I did want to show you what I meant by spinning the cards and feeling how easily they turn.
So what works best in terms of wear and tear on the warp and how they feel in my hands and how the resulting weave turns out. Are there any differences in tension or the way the pattern appears? So I use the exact same pattern, 8 cards, very simple arrow pattern for both of the weaves, and I have them both here. This one was done on the horn cards, and this one was done on the wooden cards. So let's talk really quickly about the differences, and then let's talk about the similarities and what the overall outcome is of my very unscientific experiment with only, sample size of 1 for each category. So right away I will say, very much prefer the 2-inch cards, much less stressful on my hands. My hands don't ache after weaving with 2-inch cards. 3-inch cards, my hands hurt every time, especially if I'm doing a very straightforward weave that I just keep cranking and cranking and cranking. My hands hurt. So nope on these. 2-inch is the way to go, at least for me personally. So the horn cards. They are absolutely delightful to work with. They feel really nice on your hands. They're very lightweight. They're thicker. And so, as I said, was there more wear and tear on the warp? Because I'm using cotton warp yarn, I found that there wasn't any. If you are using wool or linen or something that is a little less durable, I don't know how they're going to work for you. I'm going to try and weave with these using wool yarn in the future.
Here you can see the simple arrow pattern. This is a very uncomplicated pattern. I just roll all of the cards forwards until too much twist is built up, and then I roll them backwards to undo the twist. Very simple. I don't have to count anything, and all of the cards are moving in unison. I will say these cards are a little bit slipperier than paper cards, and so I used a nail and stuck it through the holes in the cards in order to keep them from spinning when I wasn't working. Sometimes I take my knitting, and sometimes I take my spinning wheel, and sometimes I take Ruth's Inkle Loom with me to the park when my kids are playing with friends and I am chatting with parents. It's really easy and portable. I love the fact that I can take my project with me and work on it outdoors in the sunshine. So again, very simple, narrow band, 8 cards, nothing to memorize, not a complicated pattern. It's something I can work on while chatting with other folks. I don't really have to keep track of what I'm doing. It's really nice and meditative and simple. Please forgive the little bit of wiggle in my camera here. I just wanted to show you how the nice beveled edges of the cards are really smooth, how they rotate really nicely, and they don't rub on the warp threads at all.
For this length, and you can see here, 1 yard, 2 yards, 3 yards, I'm tangled, 3.5 yards, maybe 3 yards plus 12 inches. Forgive my lack of metric system here in America. I found that there was absolutely no wear and tear on the warp, and it turned out really, really nicely. The tension was really good, not different than the paper cards. The overall weave turned out really nice and consistent. Very much enjoyed these cards. However, they are very expensive per card, and so they're not going to work for wider weaving because I can't afford more than 8 cards, and even then that was a stretch. 8 cards of the horn were the same price as 20 cards of the wooden cards, and I had to wait for them to be shipped from Europe. So overall, really enjoyed using these. I could see how Vikings using horn or bone found that they had a durable card that was really almost luxurious to weave with, felt really good on the hands, something that lasted, didn't wear out like my paper cards do. And the one other big downside besides the expense is that these cards are unmarked. So doing a simple weave where I rotate everything forward every time, it's not a problem. If I were to do more complicated weaves, I would prefer to have A, B, C, and D, or 1, 2, 3, and 4 inscribed on the tablet itself. Because they're blank, it might be easier to lose your place if you are a newer weaver like I am. Okay, wooden cards. So I bought these from Hip Strings. I bought canary wood ones, and I also bought purple heart ones. And for this weaving, I used a mix of both. I used the purple heart on the outside for the border, and I used the canary wood on the inside. No difference in the different types of wood. Very easy to handle, very nice to work with. They're a little bit sharper on the edges, a little bit more abrupt of an edge, and so there's a little bit more rubbing, and they don't turn quite as smoothly. There's a little bit more friction, so that may be an issue for wool, but not an issue for cotton. Totally fine for cotton. I really liked that the cards were marked A, B, C, and D, and even more than that, I liked that there are little knobs on each side so that without looking, you can feel where you are. It makes it really nice if you are using a more complicated pattern to make sure that everything is turning correctly and you don't have any of your cards out of alignment. Love that tactile ability to assess where my cards are.
So here you can see turning the cards. They're a little bit more stiff than the horn cards, but they still turn quite nicely. I didn't find any significant difference in the amount of friction between wood and paper cards, but I did notice that the wooden cards have more rigidity and they hold up better. If I'm doing a long weave, sometimes the edge cards, the border cards, can get bent if I'm using paper, and then they don't turn nicely and evenly with the rest of the pack. And here I found that's not a problem with wooden cards. Here you can see the finished weaves. The one on the left was done with wooden cards, the one on the right was done with horn, both using the same weight and manufacturer of cotton warp yarn. Didn't really find any discernible differences between the two in terms of tension or final product. Quite happy with both of them, and I would love to repeat this in the future using larger patterns if I had more horn cards.
So overall, I think I'm going to stick with weaving with wood and horn cards whenever I can. If I'm going to do a much wider weave, anything wider than 20, I won't have enough cards. Or maybe I'll use a combination of horn and wood in order to get up to 28. For those wider weaves, I'm going to have to resort to paper, but overall, 2-inch cards are the way to go for me, even with the smaller shed. And using the more durable materials seems to work really well, and I enjoy the feel of them in my hands. I hope that was helpful for you all. If you have any tablet weaving tips or any insight into more complicated tablet weaving, I would love to hear about it. I've only been doing it for a few months, although I have cranked out quite a bit because I'm somebody who has a hard time sitting still, and if I'm going to get through meetings, like I said, lots of Zoom meetings or phone calls, I need to be doing something with my hands, and I find tablet weaving is a really good alternative if I'm kind of bored with my knitting. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and check out the ways that you can support the work of this channel down below, and I'll be back really soon.